So Esther doesn't immediately go to the king and make her petition depending on her own wisdom and favor with him. She took very cautious steps of wisdom that the Lord led her to take. She paused. She sought God for his wisdom and his favor and prayed for favor. And she pondered how to carry out her assignment. So she identified how she was going to sow in order to reap the harvest, which was the answer to prayer, where God would overturn the decree. Okay? So there were going to be specific seeds, actions that she was going to need to take. And all she needed was the first step. That's all she needed. She didn't have to see where it was all going and all the steps laid out ahead of her, okay? When you decide to take a trip somewhere, you get it all figured out ahead, right? You check your flights, you figure out your budget, you do all the stuff. I know I've known people that have to have every single hotel on the road trip marked out in advance. So I can't even imagine doing that. I've done tons of road travel for meetings in my life, and we have never done that. We never knew where we were staying that night. When we got tired of driving, we pulled off and found a place. And I have been all over this country to almost every state except 4. And 2 of those were Alaska and Hawaii. There's only 2 in the contiguous, Continental, no, not continental, because Alaska's continental, but the contiguous, the states that are all connected. Yeah. There's only 2 that I have not driven through, and all the others I've driven through many times, and we have done many around the country trips for ministry, and I have never done it that way. I tell you, and it's funny to me when I hear people having to plan every single little and be in control and charge of every single little. You know, we've never been homeless, and we've never gone without food, and we've never gone without a roof over our head when we're on the road. Anyway, we just need to know what to do today. And that's what Esther needed. She needed to know what to do first, and that is the step that she was getting from the Lord in prayer. As she paused, she sought God for wisdom, and she pondered how to carry out this assignment. And she began to prepare her heart to let faith rise. And that's why she was probably singing songs. She was probably recounting stories to herself of how God moved in her nation before. And now her heart needed to be prepared with wisdom and courage. And so she was preparing the ground of her heart. And that means that she had to have been praying. Esther had to have been praying. She had to have been seeking God and allowing God to purify the ground of her heart. Purify her motivations and get her heart ready for what could be a very sacrificial investment of her life. And so she asks Mordecai. She made this public. She asks Mordecai to gather the Jews in Shushan to fast and pray for her for 3 days, while she and her maids fasted likewise. And so there was a series of actions here. You see, she received the assignment. She began to prepare her faith and the ground of her heart, and she began to receive a set of instructions. And that first instruction was to get everybody on board, because this was about the nation of Israel. It wasn't just about them. It was about the nation of Israel. So after 3 days, Queen Esther prepares herself and puts on her royal robes, and she goes to the king. And she is given such favor that not only is her life spared, but she is granted any request up to half the kingdom. Well, surely here's her chance to slip in there and get the outcome that she needed, and rush the process. I mean, she could have done that to save her people right then and there. But God put a stop on her. He caused her to be cautious, and God gave Esther additional wisdom. Another step to take when she gets there and she has favor with the king. God has prepared the king's heart to do his will and to harden Haman's heart, and certain things had to happen. And so that meant a process that Esther needed to walk with God in order for Haman's heart to be hardened and the king's heart to be softened, because there was more that needed to happen there than Israel being rescued from sure destruction. Haman had to be found out as well. So Esther continues to let God prepare the ground of her heart. And so she generously sows time and attention, honor and humility. So be generous in your sowing. Be willing to take extra steps. Be willing to receive more instruction from the Lord. And be willing to multiply your sowing, whatever it is that God is having you do in order to achieve the outcome that you seek. But for now, Esther simply requests that the king and Haman be pleased to attend a banquet that she prepared for the king. So at the banquet, later that day, the king repeats his offer to grant her petition, up to half the kingdom. Now this time his heart is even softer toward her. See, God is working, softening his heart. So, if she had aborted that too soon, if she had brought an end to that process too soon, if his heart wasn't soft enough and she gave her request up to half the kingdom, well, the request to save the entire nation of Israel from annihilation, he might have hardened his heart again. His heart needed to be really, really soft, and only God knew when he was ready, and she needed to trust him for that. So, but then at this banquet, the king adds the assurance to her, "It shall be done." Surely now is the time to act, she thinks, but no. Esther humbly, we might think that, but Esther, she humbly and respectfully asks the king to come with Haman to another banquet. And tomorrow I will do as the king has said, she tells the king. So now we're at the second banquet, and God is softening the king's heart even more. And now God is going to prove and lay bare Haman's heart. Now, Haman has always been put out by Mordecai's refusal to bow and scrape before him. So today, exulting in the glory of being included in an intimate royal circles, that he's filled with this indignation, and he wants to see Mordecai hanged. Okay, he wants Mordecai out of there. And he's glorying in being included in this banquet. And so he secretly orders gallows to be prepared and built for Mordecai. But God continues to add his supernatural involvement to Esther's natural investments, to Esther's natural sowing, to the natural steps that she is taking as God lays them out for her. You see, are you getting this? And she is investing sacrificially. So that night, the king cannot sleep. God is working in the king aside from Esther, you see. And this is why I know but I have experienced this so many times, not just from this example in the scripture, but in real life, how when God is working in me, he is preparing my husband's heart and doing similar works in him aside from me, without going through the same things I'm going through. And you know, whenever I'm doing a conference somewhere, I would, at the beginning of our conferences, I always pray over the families that are left at home. Moms will be there, or couples will be at a conference, but the children will be at home. Or if a husband is left at home, I always pray that God independently works in them and prepares their heart for the good work that is being done in mom while she's gone, so that independently of having to go through the process that she's gone through, God could do a work there as well, only differently. And this is what's happening here, ladies, is the king cannot sleep. God is working in his heart. Esther has been praying, and she's been taking steps of obedience, and God is doing a work. So the king just happens to have read to him a book that chronicled Mordecai's earlier uncovering of a plot against the king's life. And he finds that Mordecai was that person who uncovered it and has never been rewarded. You see, he just happened to be reading this book or report or whatever it is. You can imagine it being a report that was handed to him, and it was probably on a stack of reports on his desk, and he just happened to read that one that night, and he couldn't sleep. And God is moving in his heart to bless Mordecai because he hadn't been rewarded for having uncovered this plot against the king's life. So Haman enters the king's courtyard right on cue, thinking that he has come to ask the king to have Mordecai hanged. Now, isn't this funny how God orchestrated this? I just think it's hilarious. Haven't you experienced little things like that in your life? I've experienced things like this where God just orchestrates, and it ends up being the last laugh is on you, you enemy of God. The laugh is on you. So instead of listening to Mordecai's request, the king asks Haman, what should be done for a man he wants to honor? The king wants to honor a man, and he didn't tell him who it was, but he asked Haman this. And in his great pride, Haman, he's been strengthening himself in pride and boasting in his own glory to his friends and to his family. And Haman assumes that he's the one that the king wants to honor. This arrogance. So he suggests a grand public display of splendor, which the king orders him to lavish on Mordecai. Can you imagine his humiliation, which soon turns to terror at Esther's banquet? This time, when the king asks for Esther's request, she makes it. And this is what she says. If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. And the king, with a heart full of love and respect for Esther and gratitude for Mordecai that God had worked in his heart that very night before, he becomes outraged. Who is he? And where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther answers, it is this wicked Haman. Well, in great wrath, the king ordered Haman hung on the very gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. To Mordecai and Esther, he gives his signet ring and the house of Haman. Now, a signet ring was a seal. Back then, they used their signet rings as seals of their signature. And And so that was a very important, that was a very prestigious gift that the king gave to Esther and Mordecai. Their lives were then safe and they were honored, but Haman's letters ordering the destruction of the Jews were still in effect. So watch what has to happen here. Esther must continually, literally risk her life and sow in tears. So she multiplied her sowing, she continued to pray, and she stays actively involved in the situation until full deliverance is given. And so she continued to anticipate and expect and hold her ground. So there was a spiritual warfare. She knew they weren't secure yet. Yes, the decision had been issued, but this decree had gone out in the land. And there's a lot of people involved in carrying that thing out. And that the new decree had to be also broadcast in the land. And she held her ground in faith and prayer that until it was an actually done deal, so the enemy could not regain any ground. So again, the king shows her favor and says, you yourselves, Esther and Mordecai, write a decree concerning the Jews as you please. In other words, anything you want to say in it, you write it, and in the king's name, seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. Because she had continued to pray and brought her concern to the king and let him know there was still a danger, you see, he stepped up and he took his decree a step further and said, yes, here, you do this now. You make us say what you needed to say. And then I have two little brown bunnies just frolicking around outside my window here. That's so cute. Sorry, that's so cute. They're just playing together. It's funny. He stepped it up, and her prayer was answered. And that day, the Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And once more, God's will was done because someone partnered with him in faith and became sacrificially involved to sow righteousness in the earth, and wickedness was uprooted by the hand of the Lord. Isn't that an amazing story? I just love it. I love that story, because not only was a lot life depended on Esther's obedience. You see, now moms, you don't have these kinds of challenges. I don't have these kinds of challenges, but I tell you, if you can see the spiritual realm, and you can see, the earth was given over to the enemy. It wasn't given over to God. It was given over to the enemy. And there are demons everywhere. We need God's angels working for us. We need a prayer life, and we need lots of faith, and we need to rescue our family and loved ones from the destruction that sin causes in our lives and the results that sin has caused. In other words, the fruit that has to be turned around. That's a big work that God has given us that we can be activating by faith. Now, but there are lots of other areas of our lives. God wants to have all of it, and we can be activating our faith in everything, you see.